Hello, everybody. I don't know if I'm really live yet because I can't see myself. When you can't see yourself, how do you know if anybody else can see you? And if a tree falls in the woods and there's nobody around to see it, has it really fallen? Right? These are the questions that puzzle our minds consistently. I tell you, sometimes, my brain takes vacation while my mouth is still going. And then I come out with some of the stupidest stuff. And I just can't help it. But I think we're all like that a little bit. Okay, excellent. Thanks for telling me you can see. It's good to know people can see me. It's good to know people can hear me. What ends up happening is I hit the button on this end. Hello, everybody who's saying hello. I hit the button on this end and it doesn't appear in the video stream until a few seconds later. So, in the meantime, you see me kind of sitting here going, it doesn't make for good broadcasting, right? And so somebody asked recently, here's another thing. Somebody said, why does it say Zoom in the corner of your video, right? So I stopped using Zoom this week because I'm doing something different, or this time because I'm doing something different. And now you got to look at Google in the upper left of the window. So, it's really just a matter of which one you want to see, right? Okay. So we're going to talk about some really interesting astrological topics tonight. We'll go into those here in a moment, but waiting for some people to join us. So it's not just, me repeating things that I say over and over and over again, which gets really boring. So if anybody has any general astrological questions that they want to ask, you can feel free to ask them at this moment in time, and I will endeavor to do my best to answer those. Okay, great. Let's see what anybody has to say, or everybody has to say, or nobody has to say. Somebody also got on to me. I'm just joking. They didn't really get on to me and said, I better not start eating on my videos. I'd never eat on my videos. But, sometimes I have to take a drink because when you run your mouth all day, and that's kind of like the hazard of the profession, your throat gets a little bit raw and tired. So sometimes I have to do that. Otherwise, you'd hear me losing my voice. So let's see what people have to ask. Any general questions while we're waiting for maybe, let's say maybe 5, 6, 7 more people to get here. And then we'll start our conversation for today, right? It's always wonderful, okay, good. Can I talk something about a debilitated sun and how that plays into what you attract into your life and the higher purpose? Well, a debilitated sun, you have to think about all the different things that relates to, right? A strong sun is consistent, right? A strong sun is really willing to recognize, sacrifice for the things that it feels inspired by. A strong sun is also, has good, healthy self-esteem. Now, when you have a debilitated sun, you've got all the opposite, right? You begin to take the mindset of quite often not really feeling inspired by too much, perhaps not really willing to sacrifice for the things that you want in your life, difficulty being consistent, and equally some self-esteem problems. All of those tend to fit into your socialization and how you interact with other people, and equally how you interact with your destiny. And so when the mindset is one of low self-esteem in connection with a debilitated sun, then you're going to attract into your life those things that confirm that sense of low self-esteem. Everybody hold on a second. I'm getting too warm in here. Just need to turn the heat down a little bit so I don't sweat. So that's just some simple things, okay? Waiting for a few more people to get here. Let's take a couple more questions. Okay, well, just a simple thing, a moon in Aries, just a simple thing, right? I can't give in-depth things. A moon in Aries for somebody who's a Gemini ascendant, that's the second lord in the 11th house. It can mean that the mother could be financially ambitious. That's just a simple thing, okay? All right, so let's see. What is the difference between KETU conjuncting Sun and RAHU conjuncting the Sun? That's a good question. I like that question. Let's talk about that one for a second. Okay, so K2 conjuncting the sun. When K2 is connected to the sun, there are feelings of as if an individual is somehow never good enough. They're never satisfied with the sun, because you have to recognize K2 on one hand represents that which is incomplete. It represents the incomplete part of our karma, so to speak, right? In addition to that, it also, when dependent upon the sign it's in, the well-being of its dispositor and other things like that, it represents those things that we know very well. So K2 Sun can know very well how to be humble, but sometimes it knows a little too well how to be humble. And so then it kind of, gets into this mindset of wanting to be extremely humble, right? And then that kind of turns into a subconscious desire to want to prove itself in a certain level. And it will never feel that it's good enough at certain things, especially whatever the sun relates to in the horoscope. And so it will always raise the bar higher for itself and will never quite accept the level of perfection that is already there within it, because really on a certain level, we're all perfect wherever we are at any given moment in time. That's where we're meant to be along our path, right? It doesn't mean we stop trying to grow and things like that, but we have to accept where we are. And K2 conjuncting the sun has a hard time with that acceptance. Now, when you have a Rahu sun connection, there can be difficulties in self-identification, right? So because the sun represents the self. So these individuals quite often, they get really fascinated by a specific path for themselves and will become very intensively connected to that path. And what's going on with it is they are identifying themselves with the path, right? So basically they find an interest. Let's say they get interested in astrology. They go, wow, I'm really interested in astrology. I'm, going to be an astrologer. This is what I'm going to do. But what's happening is they're identifying themselves with astrology. And when they reach that moment in that journey that they recognize that they are not astrology, or that they are not the thing that they're getting into, which doesn't mean they're not meant to do those things. But when they recognize that they can't, identify themselves with that, that's the moment that they leave that path and go and become fascinated with some other path as well. So there is a tendency towards inconsistency and identifying what one should do, the path that one should focus on. Quite often with Rahu Sun connections, you'll find that the person earlier in their lifetime had a lot of ideals placed upon them about who they should be in their life by other people, like their father or mother may have told them, when you grow up, you're going to be this. And so what happens is they grow up never knowing who they are really inside of themselves, and it becomes a journey to try to identify that. Okay, so why don't we start our talk for today? Let's have a drink. Hello to everybody who's saying hello. Hello from New York City. I used to live in upstate New York. So hello to the Big Apple, so to speak. All right. So somebody's saying Rahu Sun connection is much better than Sun K2 general view. There's never a general view with saying one is better than the other. It depends on the dispositors of the planets, well-being of the sun, so many different factors. You can't just say one's better than the other, okay? So it depends on the individual. Some people might have an easier time identifying themselves with anything and everything than they would not feeling good enough ever, right? And so it really kind of depends. So, two little bits of news. I am still offering a 10% discount as we lead up to the eclipse as a special way of helping all of you, my viewers, as we get closer to eclipse time, cope with the changes that are happening in your life. If you want to take advantage of this 10% discount on all astrological services, please visit my astrological services page. Just to give you a general idea, my tier 1 service, which is $249, would instead be basically $224. My basic astrology session, which is $149, would instead be about $134. It's just to give you a general idea. And when you go and you schedule in, when you reach the payment page, enter all uppercase letters Eclipse. and that will give you your 10% discount. If you want to schedule person-to-person with me, you can do that now as well. It costs a little extra to do it just because I have to juggle my schedule around in order to fit in person-to-person rather than just doing everything pre-recorded, as I have time to do so over the course of the day. Okay, so that is an option. Another bit of news is all you RAHU and KETU people who are really interested in RAHU and KETU, I am going to start a 2-part webinar series this coming Sunday. It will be at 6:30 p.m. UK time. I know it's kind of annoying to be like the human clock, but I'm going to give you a rundown for those of you who may be too lazy to go online and look it up online. 6:30 p.m. UK time in the States, that's 10:30 Pacific, 11:30 Mountain, that's 12:30 Central, that's 1:30 p.m. Eastern. For those of you who are in India, that should be about midnight. For those of you who are in Australia, you'd be having to get up really early in the morning on Monday, but if you want to join it, it would be really wonderful to have you there too. And this 2-part webinar series will be $125 in total. That'll cover both of the classes. Everybody will get a recording of the classes so they can go back over the techniques. In addition, for those of you who are interested and are willing to do so and will authorize this happening, you're welcome to submit your birth information so that your horoscope can be used as an example in class. And as a benefit, you'll get a general, just a very general brief interpretation. I can't do it for everybody's charts, but I can do it for a limited number of attendees. And if you go to my website, in the courses section, you'll see a link to that. I'll try to put a link somewhere in the video. Okay, but all of you who like knowing about all these RAHU things, if you go and you take that, you'll learn some good RAHU techniques, like especially how to interpret when the dispositor of RAHU is placed in a certain Rashi from RAHU and from the ascendant, how that tends to bring things to the surface in relation to the house positions connected to those positions from RAHU and the ascendant. Okay, so we got the news out of the way. One thing I wanted to talk about today is water, how exceptionally good water is. Only kidding. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about today is free will and astrology, because I've been having this come up a lot, and I think it's something that we all ponder and wonder about and can never really know in totality until we become self-realized, and then we know those things. And until then, we kind of wonder about it. But just some reflections on the things that I have noticed and my own personal opinion in regards to free will and astrology. And I see a lot of you posting questions over here. Please save them till I'm done with my little rant here, and I will come back and answer those, as many as I can. Okay. So basically, I get a lot of people, especially when I'm doing person-to-person consultations, where you will look at their horoscope and you'll notice something in their horoscope, either something good that you think is going to happen, or there may be some challenges that are approaching, or they've asked you a question, anything along the lines of, am I going to be likely to get a job? And let's say you look at their chart and you don't really see that they're in a good time that's going to like really boost them getting a job, so to speak, right? And you have to tell them that because you're telling them the truth of what you see in the horoscope. And obviously that's something that people don't always want to hear, but you still have to tell them the truth. And then the next question that you hear is, what can I do to change that? One thing I have noticed is that difficult karma that's in the horoscope, really fixed karma, is sometimes very difficult to understand. And when we're in a certain dasha period, the agenda of those planets that are there will play themselves out in one way or another in regard to the particular houses they represent, the things that they represent, etc. Okay? So the energy has to play itself out. But I have kind of found that it is our actions that we take determine on a certain level how those energies are going to play themselves out, right? So let's say, for instance, you are going through a period in your life. I'm not saying you're going through a period in your life like this, okay? You're going through a period in your life that indicates relationship difficulty, and you happen to be married, right? And you notice that you want to make sure that you don't play out this relationship difficulty, right? And you try to do your best to not do that. Well, it's likely that there will still be a little bit of that going on, but you're focusing your attention on dealing with it there. You may find that you begin to have more pronounced relationship problems outside of your personal relationships. Like maybe you have worse, relationship problems at work. So the karma, on a certain level, it would be indicated in in your Rashi chart, or in addition to that, the Dashamsha chart. If there was also difficulty with work relationships, that would show too, but it would take on a more pronounced effect because you're really focusing your attention on dealing with the relationship problems. So in short, we may not be able to alleviate every single ounce of the karma that's in our chart. But it's also not that free will doesn't make a difference. It's not that we need to take a fatalistic approach to life that kind of says, well, why bother doing anything? All this is going to happen and I'm just cursed. Or why bother doing anything? I'm going to be blessed with $1 million by this age, right? So we're meant to engage in life, because through those life experiences we learn, we grow, we become more whole. So just because your horoscope may indicate difficulty in one area of life, it doesn't mean that you just go, well, I'm going to have a difficult time there, so be it. I'm not going to do anything about it, right? But at the same time, there has to be a certain level of acceptance, right? We have to accept that the problem exists so that we can do something to transform it. We have to, on a certain level, surrender in humility to a will that's higher than ours. But we also have to remember somewhere inside of ourselves that that very same will that we're surrendering to is not necessarily separate from us. It's within us as well. A lot of it depends upon your beliefs in regards to what I'm going to say next. But if you believe in a God and you believe that God is omnipresent, then it would also stand to reason in a very logical way that God must be within you too. But in a subjective way, you may not feel that, right? So you don't know that yet. And you're having to work out your capacity to know that. And while you're having to work that out and you're not certain, you're going to likely identify with separation or duality between yourself and that being. But when you begin to understand it on a deeper level, you recognize on a certain level that there's no separation between God's will and your will. So your free will is also God's will, right? You were given it to work out in strength your karmic path, to resolve those things that are in your life, to do the work necessary to make things move, right? And to do the work necessary to make things shift in your life. It's not just about kind of walking through life, not paying attention and just not doing anything. It's about exercising your free will. It's about doing the things necessary. Even if your karma shows in a certain area that, something is most likely not going to work in your favor, even if the astrologer tells you, well, I don't necessarily think this is going to happen, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try, because in the trying itself is the resolution of the karma that's connected with it. And that leads me on to the next point, which is talking about remedial recommendations and the place and the time for those. Now, remedial recommendations really, in my opinion, are meant to harmonize us with the planets that are creating the problems, in order to strengthen those planets, in order to boost those planets. But if we go into remedial recommendations expecting that if we do something in a certain area of our chart, it's going to make us an immediate millionaire or make us the most successful business person, we're not really looking at remedial recommendations realistically. Remedial recommendations can help to burn your karma, but it's not necessarily that a ring is burning your karma or that a mantra is burning your karma. It's you focusing your will and your attention on the problem that's there, that's bringing the resolution to the karma. That's what remedial recommendations are for. It's not for you to go, oh, well, I don't have to do anything in life other than slip this ruby on my finger because that's going to boost my sun and make me a super successful business person. And also the person that I bought the ruby from excessively rich. It's not that, you need to just kind of take the lackadaisical approach. This is how I'm going to engage with things, is just by doing this simple thing. You need to bring your focus to things. That's why, in my opinion, where it's fitting, it's best in terms of the horoscope, if the horoscope harmonizes with this, to work most effectively with things like mantras and with service, because that's going to engage the individual in activity. But quite often, a gemstone's also indicated in the horoscope too, but only if a gemstone, it seems like it would be a good recommendation should it be given in those particular instances. And when it's given, it's not always necessarily that the most expensive gemstone has to be the one that's going to help the individual. Sometimes it can be a very simple mineral that has the properties of the planet and the Rashi that's there, has the crystalline structure of the planet and the color of the Rashi, which is a really good way to work with gemstones. And it doesn't always have to be expensive, right? But only when it's necessary. And again, remedial recommendations are not there to burn your karma for you. They're there to help you to focus your energy on the karma that's there, right? So, done with my rant for the moment. Let's take some questions, right? Somebody said something really interesting, which is our will is God's will, which I completely agree with. Let me read the rest of it. I've noticed that when I try to do something that is not God's will, I have a small deja vu that God knew I was going to do it already anyway. Bingo, right? That's really switched on. I'm going to scroll back up and look at some questions there. Is Mercury retrograde combusted generally considered a debilitation? Mercury cannot be both retrograde and actually combust, because when a planet is combust, it's behind the sun. And the reason for the combustion is because, let's say this finger is the sun, this finger is the planet, over here is the Earth. When the planet that is combust is behind the sun, then the rays of that planet are disrupted from reaching the Earth because we can't see that planet, right? When a planet's retrograde, Mercury, when it's retrograde, is going to pass in front of the sun. So it's not behind the sun. So it's not combust when it's retrograde. The planet cannot be retrograde and combust at the same time. It's either retrograde or combust. So no, it's not considered debilitation. The thing that most people get into considering retrograde planets bad is not the case either. Retrograde planets are some of the strongest forces in the horoscope, because the moment that that planet is retrograde, it gains in strength of Chestabala, right? Which means that that planet becomes a very powerful force in the individual's life. It just may be a more introverted planet than it is an extroverted planet. And so the individual has to engage that planet in a different way. Okay, I hope that helps to answer that question. Let's see, what else do we have? What can I say about Rahu and KETU aspects? Number one, this is my opinion. I will say this is my opinion. I'll put the rubber stamp on it going, boom, astrologer's opinion, right? The moment an astrologer goes, boom, astrologer's opinion, everybody else out there has the right to go, that's complete bullshit. Okay, so just to throw that out there, because it's an opinion, but it's an opinion that I've seen confirmed from the work that I do, from the perspective that's in my head and what is reflected back to me from the horoscopes that I'm looking at. Okay, So let's talk about Rahu and Ketu. Rahu and Ketu, as they are shadowy planets, they don't have a physical form, right? You can't like go out in space and go, ooh, here is this giant dwarf planet, Rahu, like you can with Jupiter. You can go out and go, here's this, giant dwarf planet. I just made that up off the top of my head. Okay. That sounds really stupid, doesn't it? I make up my own languages too. There's no such thing as a giant dwarf planet. But I knew that. I just made it up. Okay, you can't go out there and say, this is Rahu or this is Ketu. But what you can do with Rahu and Ketu is you can see effects that they create because they create eclipses, right? So they don't have a physical form. They're points in space. So if you work with that concept, they're not the same as every other planet, okay? They're different. You can even argue as to whether they can actually be karakas. You can argue the point of exaltation with that, which I think that the concept of exaltation and ownership given to Rahu and Ketu is something that is not always that well thought through. And it's also something that a lot of astrologers debate over. I personally don't consider them exalted or debilitated, but I notice that they tend to function in an easier manner in many ways in Taurus and in Scorpio, but that doesn't mean they're exalted there. So let's come to the concept of aspects. Planets can aspect Rahu and Ketu, right? Because planets have aspects. But Rahu and Ketu not having a physical form can't really cast a aspect on something. They can't create a drishti. They can't create a full aspect on something, right? But something that Rahu and Ketu do, as per Jaimini astrology, is called Argala, right? And that tends to, there are a couple of Argala positions. One creates strength, one creates obstruction, right? And basically, the Argala and the obstruction positions are the 5th and the 9th. So when you have that particular concept, Rahu and Ketu can give Argala. And I think a lot of astrologers have seen that Argala case in the horoscope and then interpreted it as Rahu and Ketu actually having a physical aspect. But generally, I think that that's a confusion that's created with Argala. And equally, when a planet crosses the plane of Rahu and Ketu, it's going to create a certain level of disruption for that planet, but that doesn't mean that it's a 7th aspect, right? So that's the reasoning behind that. Now, Rashi aspects can be used with the nodes, but it's not the planet, it's not the actual node that's creating the Rashi aspect. It's the Rashi that's creating the aspect. Okay, so let's see what else we've got here in our question section. And just a reminder, to kind of reflect back, the 10% discount on all consultations is available still. Probably will be for another day or so. Once things become full, I'm going to kind of shut that down. So you may want to act soon if you want to schedule a consultation and avail yourself of that discount. In addition to that, just a reminder, for those of you who are Rahu and Ketu oriented, I am starting a webinar this weekend. It's a 2-class webinar, $125 for the entire course. A benefit of this webinar is you can submit your birth information, and a select few charts of people who've submitted their birth information. I will use their charts in class with their permission and give a general interpretation related to it. And we'll learn about how to work with the dispositors of Rahu and Ketu and come to a good understanding of what the individual karmic path is about in relation to that. And you'll get a recording of it too. And that starts this Sunday, and it'll be 6:30 p.m. UK time, which you can look up online what time that is in your own particular time zone. Okay, let's see what other questions we've got here. So please pardon me while I'm quiet. I have to read. Does Mars conjuncting nodes reduce their malefic effect? No, not at all. As a matter of fact, Mars conjuncting one of the nodes is going to create dependent upon the dispositor of Ketu and Rahu, it's going, and the strength of Mars as well, it can create one of two things. Ketu Mars aspects tend to have these grandiose designs and plans of things they want to do, but they have a hard time actualizing them. Instead, they usually end up restricting themselves. Rahu Mars is having to learn how to work with the will and work with Mars without letting it explode. So both of those positions tend to attract a lot of conflict to themselves because they're needing to work out how to use their Mars in a more constructive manner. So basically, it's not true that it reduces their malefic effect. Okay, so let's see what else we've got here in the questions section. I'll scroll down and I'll scroll up. Okay, what I would like to break people of is good and bad when it comes to planets. You can't always say good, you can't always say bad, especially when it comes to Rahu and Ketu, because they're going to be in a different position in every divisional chart, and they're going to have a different dispositor, which is why you need to take my course this weekend, right? It can help you with understanding these things, right? Rahu in Leo is not always going to give good results, but it's not always going to give bad results either. It is going to give the results of needing to focus on the things that inspire you, right? Even if it inspires nobody else, even if you don't get validated for following that path, that's the path you need to follow. Bingo. All right. That's the best way to understand it, is not necessarily, is this going to bring good or bad in my life? You can't understand that with just simply understanding that that planet is in that Rashi. Okay? All right, let's see what else we've got here. So this is a good question. This was what I was trying to say in the karma, in the free will section of what we were talking about earlier. Somebody asks, when our karma gives results as our chart indicates, what does our reaction mean? There are many ways one can react to events. Do our reactions too determined by the karma, or is that free will? The free will is the karma. And the karma is also the free will. And if you look at it in light of the concept of, an individual's will not being separate from God's will. So what does your reaction mean? Your reaction means that you're doing what your soul is meant to do at that particular moment in time, which is taking steps to resolve the karma, right? Where it helps us, it doesn't mean we should stop acting, as it's stated in the Bhagavad Gita, but it's just mainly that we need to not get so mentally and emotionally involved in the actions that we think that it's us that's doing something, right? It's not us that's doing something, but that doesn't mean that we should think that we're the lowest, pebble on the face of the earth either. It just means that we need to, to be aware that it's that higher force within us that's acting. That's why the nakshatras are so important. The nakshatras represent that higher force that's in every individual. That's why if you go and you read this new translation of Taittiriya Brahmana, you'll notice that there's something about each nakshatra that says an energy from above and an energy from below, because both of those energies are in us. And that's the strength and the power of that nakshatra. Okay. Let's see what else we've got going on here. Which divisional chart calculator is accurate on the internet, Michael? It depends on whose calculations you use. Really, it's varied. Really, it depends on your teacher, which set of techniques you're working with. So there's not a simple answer to that question. Okay. Why is Venus Antardasha in Jupiter Mahadasha considered challenging? It's not always, but many times it is, because basically in many instances you'll find in the person's horoscope, in the Rashi chart, that there's an aspect, and it doesn't have to be a full aspect. Planets are almost always forming aspects with each other. But there can be an aspect from Venus to Jupiter, which in essence creates something called starvation for Jupiter. right? So when Jupiter is starved by Venus, Venus relates to the conscious decisions that we make in our life in order to live a life that's more enjoyable, within the material plane of existence. Venus is the minister in material affairs. Jupiter is the minister in spiritual affairs, the spiritual decisions that we make. So our capacity to find meaning in our life at those times becomes sacrificed by the conscious decisions that we're making to try to enjoy our life more effectively. And it's to the degree of the aspect that Venus forms to Jupiter. Okay. KETU in the 10th house, does it mean that you will never have a satisfactory career? It doesn't mean you'll never have a satisfactory career. It may mean that you never feel satisfied with your career. There's a difference between those two things. You may have a successful and satisfying career, but you can't see that you have a successful and satisfying career because you're not satisfied with it. Okay? KETU in the 10th versus Rahu in the 4th. Let's talk about that for a second. So KETU in the 10th tends to come from this mindset that in order to make life flow well and to keep everything successful and rolling along in a good way, that an individual has to be on top of things, well organized, well structured, everything in its appropriate place to make everything work smoothly, right? But we can't micromanage our lives. We can't always keep difficulty at bay. We can't always, and equally when you focus your life so intensively on, I'm going to be successful, where does happiness go? Happiness goes out the window. So then Rahu's job is to bring the attention to the individual of how unfulfilled they may feel inside of themselves, right? And recognize that it's not healthy to repress the emotions in order to just be successful. Success really is about being satisfied with where you are, right? So you can have a satisfying career, but if you're not able to feel it because you're always repressing your emotions in order to be successful, then how can you be successful? But again, take my course this weekend. You'll learn some of these things, right? Rahu in the 7th house is perplexing. Can you say a word or two about it? Perplexing and annoying. There you go. That's my 2 words. I'm only kidding. Rahu in the 7th versus KETU in the 1st. KETU in the 1st, people are going to be very self-controlled, okay? Because the focus is on self. KETU represents something that we're really good at doing because we've done it over, several lifetimes. So if over several lifetimes we've really gotten ourselves together, we haven't really learned how to get our relationships together. So the focus becomes so intensively on self that the individual begins to attract relationships that are a little bit chaotic because it's trying to help them to recognize that they may be being a little bit too self-controlled. And people with KETU in the 1st, many times, not always, you can find the right person, you can make it work. People with KETU in the 1st have a more difficult time with relationships because they have a hard time relaxing into the relationship. Okay? That's just a simple understanding. Okay. Does Saturn in Leo conjunct Sun have any positive attributes? Let's talk about that. Saturn's going to starve the Sun. It depends on the strength of Saturn, you see, and it depends on how close Saturn and the Sun are to each other, right? So if Saturn can, on a certain level, be subservient to the Sun, then the individual can be really focused and create the sacrifices that they need in their life for whatever house that Sun is in. But in addition to that, there is always going to be a certain level of stress, most likely some stress in regards to relationships, because you have to understand Saturn's going to rule the 6th and the 7th from the Sun. And Saturn quite often can get caught up in narrow thinking. It'll see the small picture, and the Sun really wants to sacrifice for the bigger picture. And so then when Saturn becomes so focused upon the smaller picture, the sun's going to get frustrated, and that can create some ego issues along the way. Not necessarily egotistical energies, but ego issues, right? So there's always going to be a certain level of difficulty with Sun and Saturn, but it depends on the strength of Saturn. It's probably the easiest way to answer that. It would be a thing of needing to see the horoscope. Let's see what else we've got here. I can probably go for another 10 minutes or so. Pardon me. Planets, somebody asked, does the Atmakaraka play out the lesson the entire life, or more specifically dasha time? Planets are always functioning during any dasha period, but it's during their particular dasha period that they take on a more prominent focus, because that's the time that their karma is coming to fruition in the individual's life. So it's more pronounced in the dasha of the Atmakaraka. In the dasha of the Atmakaraka, the individual is becoming focused on who they are as an individual. Who am I really, right? That becomes the focus. That becomes the focus. Rashi chart becomes very important during the dasha of the Atmakaraka, because the Rashi chart is the chart of the self and the chart of the path of the self, right? So it becomes very important during the dasha of the Atmakaraka. So I'm going to read over some of your questions. Somebody asks, does a debilitated and exalted planet is a debilitated and exalted planet conjuncting each other a good thing? Everything in your chart is a good thing, because it helps you to evolve and it helps you to grow. It's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. But I think what you're really asking is, can there be some easier times with that? A debilitated planet is in a state of lowness. The exalted planet can, if it has a good relationship to the debilitated planet, can help to uplift it. As a matter of fact, if let's say you've got Venus in Virgo and you've got Mercury there where it's exalted, that helps to nullify some of the effects of that debilitation. But let's qualify that statement. Let's qualify Nichabanga Raja Yoga. It doesn't mean the debilitation goes away, because a debilitated planet is always going to be a debilitated planet. And during the dashas of that debilitated planet, that debilitation will surface, and the individual will have to focus their karmic path on resolving the karma that individual represents. Okay? Let's see what else we've got here. I want to try to answer as many questions as possible, so please pardon me if I give some simple answers to things, because I want to try a lot of you are here and a lot of you are asking questions, so I want to try to deal with that. Just another thing, because there are so many people here, and I want to make sure as many people get to hear this as possible. So those of you who've heard it already, I know it's annoying, but please just let me have my rant, so to speak. For those of you who are interested in scheduling a consultation with me, because we're leading up to the eclipse, I am offering a 10% discount on all astrological services. If you go to my astrological services page, which is at AuthenticAstrology.com, you'll see what I offer there. And if you schedule something in, when you go to make your payment, if you enter the discount, all uppercase letters, Eclipse, on the payment page, you'll get a 10% discount on the astrological service that you book. In addition, I do offer person-to-person at this point. I charge extra for that. It depends on the consultation that you're booking as to how much extra. Things like, the basic career consultation, one question service, it's $25 extra. Anything that's over $100, because it's generally a longer consultation, it's $50 extra. There's a reason for that. It's because I have to restructure my schedule in terms of recording videos and everything like that in order to fit it in. And so I generally have to charge extra. Plus, people tend to reschedule upon occasion, and so it's necessary for me to do that. But you get a discount on the additional fee too. So if you want to book, please do so. Okay. In addition, I'm also, and I've said in addition like 5 times, sorry for using the same words over and over again. Talking on a camera is not easy. Basically, I am going to be starting a course, a 2-class course, just a 2-class series on RAHU and KETU, specifically focusing on the dispositors, the house positions from Rahu and from the ascendant that the dispositors occupy in every single Varga chart, the Rashis that Rahu and Ketu are in, and how that will tend to make the individual focus their energies, the complexes that it creates. Because whenever, regardless of what your question is, in terms of a consultation, Rahu and Ketu are always going to be there playing a part because they represent the overall karmic path. So it's important to understand them and overall how they are focusing their energies, which is why I'm always big on doing my my longer services, which include a karmic analysis and questions, because it helps to give you background on the questions. But that course is the 2 classes, which start this Sunday, 6:30 p.m. UK time. Is for both courses, it's for both classes, it's 125 in total. For both classes, you get a recording. You can submit your birth information if you want your chart to be looked at in class and would like a general interpretation. Okay, and there's a link to that. I'll put the link in the video once this is done. If you want to come back and video it and view it, right? You'll find it here, but it's also on my website in the courses section. Okay, let's see what other questions we have. Maybe go for another 10 minutes. Let's see what we've got here. Rahu conjunct Atmakaraka, defined life path? Not necessarily, because Rahu is I would say it may make the individual become more passionate and focused about their life path, but an over-identification with paths. They become very focused in a certain area, sort of like when I was talking about Rahu Sun earlier. They'll become focused on a path and they'll identify with the path. And then they'll kind of lose focus on it and go focus on another path that's similar to their Atmakaraka, so different paths related to the Atmakaraka, until they recognize that they are not the path, they are the self. Got it? So let's see, somebody is asking a question, and I haven't seen their question. I just see that they want to know my views, but I have not found it yet. And you have to consider that this, just reading, I can give a general answer about Abhijit. Abhijit, really, if you read, I'll read something to you from Taittiriya Brahmana, right, is really a part of the Ashadhas. Let me find this text for you. Okay, I have to find it. Bear with me. So keep in mind, I have to give you a simple answer. It's because really it's included in the other nakshatras. Okay, please pardon my Sanskrit. It's not the best, okay? Vishvesham devanamutaraha abhijayat parastat abhijitamavastat. Okay, so abhijayat, superiorly conquering. Abhijatam, complete victory. That's also Abhijit that's in there. And so basically within the sutra from Taittiriya Brahmana about Uttara Ashadha, basically Abhijit is included. So really it's part of Uttara Ashadha, right? So there's not really a need to include it as something different because it's part of the Ashadhas, okay? All right. That's the clearest answer I can give in a short time. Let's see what else we've got here. When you have no birth time, how do you do your rectification, if at all? Well, generally what I like to do, but I don't do rectification by dashas because by dashas alone, I should say, because dashas are sloppy. I tend to use transits and a special system of transits in order to rectify. But in order to rectify with no known birth time, you have to whittle things down. So good practices to do are to look at the horoscope and talk to the individual about their life, get them to tell you about their life experience, get them to tell you about some broad events in their life, in addition to some events that happened on an exact day. But with the broad events, go in and go, well, which ascendant would make these things work? And you can look at those as your ascendant. If you know some good techniques for foreign residency and you find out the individual has lived abroad, that also helps to narrow down the amount of ascendants. Then once you've narrowed down the ascendants, it's a thing of going, right, okay, so does this event fit with this ascendant? If it doesn't, you might want to consider another one. And then you've whittled it down further. Then by the time you get down to an ascendant or two, it's a matter of going in with the transits and matching the events to the individual's chart. At the end of it, you might find that you still have a couple of different ones. Then you go back through and you use the dashas and you see which one makes more sense as per the dashas, right? That's the best way to do it. If I put it in like a 2-minute nutshell, so to speak. Okay. Let's see what else we've got here. I'm going to scroll up for a bit. That's why I'm being quiet, because I've answered a lot of questions here. Okay, I can't tell you what might happen in the Venus dasha that you're mentioning, but somebody said, would a Venus dasha be negative for someone who has a combust Venus in an enemy's sign? Combust planets create difficulties. But if you're looking at that combust planet in the Rashi chart, overall on the individual's life path during that Venus dasha, they are likely not going to be satisfied with that Venus. But it doesn't mean that that Venus in another Varga chart is not creating successful results. So they may have a strong Venus who's the 10th lord and it's exalted in the Dashamsha, and they have a really successful period in their career. But that Venus, whatever it represents and is combust about, because when a planet's combust, it disrupts its capacity to fulfill its duty to its houses. It's almost like it has an allergy to those houses and it can't do things. Those areas don't go well, even though the individual might be having a successful career. So do you follow? It's not always, but it's still a combust planet in that particular Varga chart too. Right? So it will have some periods where there are some incompatibilities to it. So things might be successful, but they're not able to appreciate it on a certain level. Okay? So it's never as simple as one thing or the other. It's never as simple as, is this going to be negative or positive? Because if that was true, you would be looking at your world in plain black and white. Everything you look at would be black and white. It wouldn't be like, color. You wouldn't be seeing subtleties. You wouldn't be seeing things beneath the surface. You would just go, this is that, and life would be very robotic, and life isn't like that. Okay? All right, let's see what we've got. So please pardon me from being quiet. For being quiet, not from being quiet. If anybody has any other questions, please feel free to ask. Yeah, because I'm not seeing any more questions here at the bottom. Okay. Does KETU in 12th house generally indicate a crazy person? No, it may indicate a person who likes their solitude. They've become accustomed to being alone. Yeah. Uttara Falguni can be actors. Yes, they can, but they can also be diplomats. They can also be people who work for a cause, any number of things, right? I may not make a video on Yogini Dasha, just so you know. Yeah, if you want to email me, we may be able to go a little bit back and forth with that. But please understand, I'm only giving you my opinion, okay? Different people will say different things. Let's see what else we've got here. See if I can find another question or two. Sapta Vimshamsha. Another word for that is the Bamsha chart, the 27th divisional chart. That shows the strengths an individual has and their capacity to utilize those strengths in order to overcome challenges. Any points to look into in reading it? The 3rd house, the 9th house, and Mars are vitally important to that Varga chart. Somebody's asking, do planetary aspects affect the nakshatra in the house it aspects to? It's affecting the house, but that house will, if you're using house cusps especially, will play itself out in a nakshatra type manner. But it's not necessarily the planet that's affecting or aspecting the house. It's aspecting the house, and the house is growing itself in a nakshatra manner because nakshatras grow things. Okay? Let's see what else we've got. If anybody has some other questions too, because I'm kind of scrolling up the list, see if I've missed other questions. And I'll scroll down too. What's a combust planet going to do? A combust planet can do any number of things. You have to understand where it's combust at, what it rules, everything like that. So you can't just come out and say a combust planet is going to do this, right? Generally, if I had to say a combust planet is going to do anything, it means that there's an incompatibility between the individual and the things that that planet is associated with, because the rays of that planet aren't able to reach the earthly plane of manifestation, right? So the individual isn't able to connect with the energy of that planet. So it creates an incompatibility. 6th versus 10th versus 7th. Which house most important for getting a job? Well, the 10th is success. So that's going to identify your capacity to be successful getting a job. The 7th relates to your interaction in trying to get the job. The 6th represents the hard work that you put in towards getting a job. So it depends on the interactions between the planets that rule all of those points. It's not necessarily that one is more important. The concept of one of them being more important than another one becomes an illusion, most likely based upon either having a strong 10th lord or a strong 7th lord or a strong 6th lord, you see, because if you have one of those that's really strong in your horoscope, you'll just immediately identify, oh, it's the 10th lord that creates this. But you have to do research across a broad spectrum of charts. All of those houses are serving different purposes. That's the important thing to recognize. They're serving different purposes. Okay? The 10th and the 7th are connected to each other, though, because the 7th is the Bhavat Bhavam position from the 10th. And so in order to be successful, you need to have primarily a good relationship to yourself, which is also, when you have a good relationship to yourself, you can have successful relationships in general. Okay. All right. I am looking down at the very bottom to see if we have one more question. If I can make it back down to the bottom. I think I've made it to the bottom. What happens to a planet defeated in planetary war? When a planet is defeated in planetary war, the planet that defeats it takes a lot of its strength. It feels put upon by that planet on a certain level because that planet is draining its energy, the planet that defeats it. But people tend to read planetary war and combustion in the wrong way. They just think that, oh, if a planet's in a degree of another planet, it's going to be in planetary war. Or if a planet is in a specific orb of the sun, it's going to be combust, but that's not the case. And if you go back and look into Surya Siddhanta, you'll see that there's supposed to be greater calculations for both planetary war in addition to combustion, and they have to be judged by local space, which is why if you hear somebody say, oh, there's a Venus-Jupiter conjunction, and you go outside and you look up in the sky and you go, those two planets are way far apart. How can that be a conjunction? Somewhere else on the planet, were you to look at it, they would appear to be closer to each other, right? So basically, combustion is based upon local space, as is planetary war. And those things have to be taken into consideration. But astrologers got lazy somewhere along the way and decided, well, it's too hard to go through all these calculations. Let's just say if it's within a degree of this, that's fine. But now we have software to do it for us. Those calculations need to be taken back into consideration again. Okay, so 2 reminders in parting, everybody. Just a reminder, if you want to take advantage of the 10% discount that is still in effect for a limited amount of time, I may shut it off tonight. I'm not sure. It depends. I had planned on shutting it off at 11 tonight, so you may want to schedule soon. We'll have to see, because my schedule is becoming close to being full, so I am going to shut it off when it becomes full. I'm not talking about full for the entire year, but, full through, several weeks, so that I, would be really far out, so to speak. I am already far out, but I think you know what I mean. So in addition to that, the upcoming RAHU and KETU course that starts this weekend, if you're interested in registering, you can also find information about that on my page. I'll also put a link up above in the video and links to both my services page. And again, if you want the discount on the services, when you reach the payment page, enter the code Eclipse, all uppercase letters there. And if you want to register for the course, that is listed on AuthenticAstrology.com. Go to the courses page. You'll see it. It starts this Sunday. Okay, everybody, thank you for the time to let me talk and for joining in. And everybody take care, and I will talk to you all, I'm sure, very, very, very soon. Bye now.